largest of our outbuildings. Now this part is called the Novak building. And I know it kind of looks like it's a maintenance shed slash storage area, but it is actually a part of our museum, where you can see a lot of the larger exhibits, such as stoves, large chairs, and even a sewing machine. And if we come back around here, you can start to see tractors lining the wall. And then over to here, we have multiple different things, even more chairs, including a barber shop chair right here, and a bunch of different typewriters. We have some typewriters here, and then adding machines throughout. Currently, this case is empty, but it will soon be filled. Then you can see these two separate cabinets here you can look inside of. This is actually a ticket dispenser. Then we can move over to these. These are models. This one's a model train set that was built for the museum. This is the North Dakota Great Northern Railway Prairie Town. We do ask that you do not touch anything on here or actually in this building at all. We just want to keep everything as nice as possible. Now this one is our second little diorama out here. Now it's a little worse for wear, but it's still quite amazing to see in person. And if you look down below, there's the Northern Pacific steam engine bell and even the anchor. Then we have a large piano here, and actually the area that we would oftentimes have our paint and sip classes. Now as we go into the next edition of this building, it goes into the Novak building. Now, the Novak family donated a lot of the things in our museum, and so did the Novak family. Now, if you go through these doors, you'll actually go out to our little sitting area where you can see the pollination center, which was planted for us and by us, in most parts. But throughout this, you can see all sorts of different farm equipments throughout the decades, and even things that weren't used for farms, such as sleighs and wagons. And as you go along, you can see the different eras, including the John Deere era. This is around the time that John Deere first started making implements and having their custom green and yellow color scheme. Then we get to the bit more complicated ones. This is a Piesic thrasher by Hart Carter Company, and you can see all the different pulleys and mechanisms that make it run. Then this one uses a chain drive as opposed to the pulley drive from the previous machine. This one's a little bit older than that one. It's actually made out of wood as opposed to the steel and tin combination. So is this one. Here's another thrasher. This one's a combination of tin and wood. It would be a lot less expensive, but still a pretty pricey artifact for that time period. You can see so many more things, including this standard oil tank here that you would take out to your farm or even be used at what we would nowadays consider a gas station. In those times it would be considered an oil station. You can see different wagons over on this side for grain or even people. There are multiple covered wagons, which is very common to see when you think of the Oregon Trail or anything old-timey, as many people would say. But I think the most interesting thing in the Novak building is at the very end here. And it looks like an airplane on wheels. So this is actually a crop sprayer. This is actually patented. I know it looks like it was built by a farmer that had way too much to drink, but it did actually go through the entire patent process and became an official machine that you could purchase. It could go between 80 and 90 miles an hour to spray your crops. It was significantly faster than any other method and much easier to handle than an airplane. However, it was expensive, dangerous, and just flat out impractical. But it sure looks cool. Then over here, we actually have a scoreboard that was originally in the gymnasium for the old schoolhouse that has now become the main building of our museum. As we make our way out of the Liebach building, we then enter into another extension. Now, to my left here is what I like to call the garage, and to the right is the blacksmith shop. So we're actually going to start with the blacksmith shop, just because I like blacksmithing. So, not everything in here is related to blacksmithing. In fact, we start out on the right here with different brands that were used throughout this area. And some of them are actually still in use today as family brands. And you can actually see some of the brands here. Then we make our way over into the actual blacksmithing part. For those of you that don't know, blacksmithing is the form of metalwork in which you get metal extremely hot and oftentimes use some kind of hammer or other device to mend it or make it pliable, and then put it into whatever shape that you wish, whether it's a tool, a blade, or even armor. Around this area it would most likely be a tool, but oftentimes they'd actually build their own forges. So these are old forges. You would actually crank these levers in order to turn a gearbox that would turn a small fan that would then go up through here to keep the embers extremely hot in order to melt the steel at around 14,000 degrees. As you make your way over, you'll notice all these pulleys coming down from one bar. So that one bar would actually be running to a water wheel of some kind or a steam engine in later years in order to power their tools. Tools like this grinder. Now, if they didn't have access to something like that, how would they grind something? Well, they'd oftentimes build a way to grind down the metal, such as this. This is a foot-powered one, where you would step here. I'm not going to do it, it is an antique, but it would result in this spinning around very similarly to a classic Singer sewing machine. It would spin around and you could actually grind down the edge of the blade. This one is a bit more ingenious in my opinion, and I just gotta love it. This is based off of the design of a bicycle, but you would pedal there and you would put whatever you were sharpening in this groove here in order to then be sharpened right here using a chain. And I believe that chain was actually taken off of a farm implement, as that is an implement chain. Now as you move over here, you can see all kinds of different saws, and we slowly move more into saddle making. Now saddle making is a very extensive process, working with a lot of leather, a lot of mass, and a lot of time. We do have multiple saddles on display, but we also have a couple of other things. We have some whips down here, and other leather working materials, tools, devices, and this is very interesting to me. This is actually the skeleton that you would build a saddle off of. That's an antique one. Modern day ones would look a lot different, but they oftentimes would use wood for their bases. Right here is something that I find extremely interesting. This is what's called a foot vise. So you would step on this and it would pinch this vise parallel to the grippers, which is unlike most modern day vices, where you could just hold it in place long enough to do what you needed to do, and then you release it with your foot and move on. Of course, you can see a leather sewing machine there as well, which we have multiple throughout our museum, because we are lucky enough to have such wonderful people to donate, loan, or even sell us some of these things. Now we move more into the garage. This has different pump engines, washing machine engines, and getting up into things that are a bit more on, like this here. This is a homemade steam engine. And actually you can see here the ever so classic, what some people call is a ball bearing spindle. You'd have these weights on the end that would then spin to indicate that it's actually working properly. It's very interesting to see it sitting here, and then I imagine it would be even more interesting to watch it go. And then the ever so classic Ford Model T, which was the first mass-produced vehicle made by Henry Ford himself. He actually invented the assembly line in order to produce the Model T for a much lower price than most modern cars. A lot of people make the mistake in believing that the Model T was the first car ever built. It was not. It was the first car ever mass-produced on a scale to the point that the average American could afford it. Then you move down. This is an International 6-speed special truck. You can't find many international trucks anymore, but this one's an absolute classic. But they didn't just build cars in the 1920s, they also needed firefighters. So as you slowly move up this way, you can see things getting newer and newer. So these are actually two separate ones. This one is from 1918. It would have been drawn by horses, as with this one. But then we move on to the gas power. So this here is a gas-powered Alexander Fire Department fire truck. Now Alexander is actually our local town here that we're based in. Now this one is a Dodge, and it's a very rare commodity because not many of these vehicles were produced except for fire departments and police. Then you can see multiple different license plates throughout different years, all the way up to 1948. You can see 1930, 1935, 1933. You can actually look through all of those. Here is an old red Viking bike. It's a classic bicycle, still very reliable to this day. As a matter of fact, my personal bicycle is very similar to this because they still work. And then, of course, an old-fashioned lawnmower, a couple of pumps, and other gardening and farming essentials. And that's just one of many of our buildings, and it's so full of such amazing things here at the Alexander Lewis and Clark Trail Museum.